All right, we're here. We're live for the big 100. You know what I'm saying? Big one hundo.
Sound the alarms.
We reached the Benjamins, y'all. We reached our Benjamins. Now we need y'all to go ahead and start paying us some Benjamins, you know what I'm saying? But But in any case, as you guys probably heard in the midst of my ramblings, we got a special guest up in here today to bring her back in for the big one hundo, talking about the big man himself, the one true goat, Darth Vader. We got the sword of the Jedi. What's going on? What's happening?
Oh man, what a loaded question. I don't know. So much is happening. I'm so over everything right now. So many different ways. But you know what? We're here. It's wow, 100. What a milestone. And we're going to talk about one of the most iconic movie characters of all time. So, that's something.
I know. It's absolutely crazy how it worked out that on the 100th episode, we can honor Big Vader, Darth Vader, just like continuing on with our series. So we can jump into it. I'm Demetrius.
And I'm Demetrius.
And Meech presents
the Blurred City Podcast.
All right, so we are getting into our mass character study series. So with that, we're kind of going chronologically and how the characters connect. So last week we did Doctor Doom. This week we're doing Darth Vader. And the week after we're going to do Obito Uchiha from the Naruto Shippuden series. So before we jump into Vader and all that shenanigans, let's do the legal spiegel.
The purpose of this podcast is to explore digital and print media. All sources we reference are owned by the respective companies, and our thoughts and opinions are strictly our own and reflect no biases or corporate agendas. Your discretion is advised.
All right, Jamie, so I realize that the fact that we keep inviting you on for Star Wars is getting us in trouble with our other Star Wars friends. I know Meech has been cornered multiple times. I've been asked about it, but we had to do this for Vader. We apologize to our friends.
I apologize for nothing.
Yes, so as our senior Star Wars correspondent, we had to have you on for this episode. So with this, we're going to get into our character study series. That is when we take a character, maybe a storyline. We've done a few comic book storylines itself, kind of just break it down, the mindset of a character, what breaks it down, their history, also just kind of backstories, the philosophies, theologies, relatability. So that's kind of what we get into with the character study series. Again, last week we did Doctor Doom. Meech, do you want to say how Doctor Doom connects to Darth Vader?
All right. Well, if you're looking at it, like in terms of the characters, like in terms of personality, is specifically as Darth Vader. We're not counting Anakin. We're not counting anything like prequels related whatsoever. But in terms of like their characters, right, you can see how Darth Vader is influenced by Doctor Doom. In the sense of, okay, you have a masked, hooded, a masked, caped villain who has, I don't know about any of y'all, but when I read or hear Doctor Doom, I just hear a deep, deep man, literally like with the voice with deep baritone voice, and just that menacing aura, straight villainy, and also has some intelligence behind them too, to the point where like, hey, and again, most recognizable villains, the two most recognizable villains of all time, arguably. Some would probably say Joker, and I'm not about to debate that for right now. We know he's a GOAT, but if you're looking at like the Mount Rushmore of villains, Doom and Vader they have to be there.
I think Vader has that Washington spot.
Oh yeah, 100%. But also the fact that the two, they're rulers of their respect, kind of rulers of the kingdom, enforce a iron fist.
All right, yeah. So before we start breaking it down, Jamie, what's kind of like your, not relationship, but just feelings and just general thoughts on Anakin and like Darth Vader himself before we jump in?
Oh, man, what a loaded question that can have so many rabbit holes. I love Anakin. Anakin is my boy. I have a soft spot for Anakin forever. Also because Padme is my favorite. So, he's married to my girl. It's a whole thing. I have a really difficult time referring to him as a villain in isolation because, he did some messed up stuff. I feel like it was entirely his fault. it gets to a point where like, yeah, he's making his own choices, but like, I don't know. I just have a problem referring to him like isolated as only a villain, which is part of why I love what the Ahsoka show did with his character, because I think it brought the two sides of him together beautifully. That shows that he's not fully one or the other. Yeah, I don't have a problem referring to him as like a hero in his early life, because he absolutely was. And then obviously his fall was the greatest tragedy in the story of Star Wars. But yeah, I think he's a fantastic character. I think he's a complex character. I think that Hayden portrayed him beautifully and got way too much hate for his role. But he's such an incredibly complex character that he just, keeps bringing us back to him.
Perfect. So with that, we're going to jump into the character study series. Again, case study, Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, the Chosen One. So with that, we're going to get into full spoilers of all the movies, Clone Wars, Rebels, and then also some EU stuff. So Meech, kick us off.
All right, so we kick off Darth Vader, aka Anakin Skywalker's story with the best thing of all, sand. All right, so on the desert planet Tatooine, this boy, he was conceived without a father, and to Shmi Skywalker, unfortunately, both are in slavery with Watto, and this man, or right now this boy Anakin, he's like, you could tell he has a really strong connection with the Force, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jar Jar Binks, neither here nor there. We don't talk about Darth Jar Jar, but yeah, they're on oh yeah, and also Padme, they're all on Tatooine. They're looking for a ship or repairs for their ship, in order to get off the planet, and they encounter Anakin and Shmi. And Qui-Gon immediately noticed something different about this boy, just how strong of a connection to the Force he is, and right away you could tell like his great aspirations, like he wants to see every star and every planet, like he wants to be off the world, and you can also tell like he has a strong relationship with his mother, because obviously it's his mother. Like she took care of him, and he also built a C-3PO, which not many people kind of remember. But yeah, so essentially, okay, yeah, so just starting off right there, like you can see like his personality, like he's a real go-getter. He really knows how to say his words, especially around a certain Padme. She's definitely an angel, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, that's starting things off.
Jamie, you got anything with his early days? Because I have a question after.
Yeah, I love this era of Anakin. I think for me personally, there's something about every Star Wars movie that still makes me cry every time I watch it, and I'm not ashamed of that at all. But the thing that really gets me about this first movie is just how beautifully innocent Anakin is in this film. When we meet him, the only thing he cares about is helping other people, right? Like he's a slave in this shop, but like immediately he's trying to help Qui-Gon and the others, and immediately, like, yes, obviously he immediately has this fascination, let's say, with Padme, but like immediately he's trying to do everything he can to help them. He brings them to his home when there's a storm that threatens to harm them. He proposes like himself to put himself in danger to try to help them get what they need. And then even the dinner conversation is really what gets me, because he's got this like sense of awe about the Jedi, and like nobody can kill a Jedi, and like the Jedi are like so cool, and like just this such innocent, like beautiful picture that he has of the world and the way that he interacts with it. And it's just it just hurts me because it's so beautifully innocent, and it's all going to shatter within a few short years. But like that little era of him I love to come back to, because it's like I think that at his core who Anakin really is, and then from there is going to be who kind of manipulates him and who really has the strongest formational say in his life about what he becomes.
All right, so a question I have, please keep your lightsaber seethed on that. How much older is Padme than Anakin?
5 years.
5 years.
The way they make this phrase.
She is 14 when they meet.
Okay, that's not as
best in some Hollywood marriages. Let's just point that out.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Jonas, I love the Jonas Brothers. I love my boy Nick Jonas, but like Nick Jonas and Priyanka is older, so that's better than them. So
we didn't have to name names.
Dang, yeah, we really didn't. But I was gonna say, like somebody
That's the
who's
first example I think of because I'm a very big Jonas Brothers fan, so I don't have any problem throwing that out there.
That's
I was gonna say, like, as a person who's currently in kind of a predicament as well, it's not that bad. It's not that bad looking at it. It's not that bad looking at it. You know what I'm saying? That's 5 years is not bad at all.
I mean, when you frame it from like youth, obviously, we're getting off topic. Let's get.
Yep, let's move on. All right, let's move on to the freedom of Anakin Skywalker. Qui-Gon adamant. He notices his force potential immediately. He's like, oh, Sap, this boy has higher midichlorians than Yoda. Hey, yo, we need to get this boy trained ASAP. Does everything he can, even with a little bit of shadiness involved, which I mean, hey, it's Qui-Gon. We let him ride with that. And he manages to free Anakin. Unfortunately, he was unable to get his mother free. But his mom is the one who encourages him to go, to be a Jedi, to see the stars, live out the dream, you know what I'm saying? So they go, they leave, they go to the Jedi Council, and they're like, no. So yeah, and you want to know the reason why? Let's see. Number one, he's too old. Yeah, he definitely missed the cutoff date for being aged for a Jedi. Don't act little Skywalker nothing. And then also the fact that, like, because of that, he has a strong attachment to his mother. He has attachment. He has feelings. And according to the Jedi, feelings is bad. Okay. Feelings are bad. Feelings is what leads to the dark side. He has fear. He has fear of losing his mother. Fear is a path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And you about to see what happens to this boy when he goes through every last one of them stages. So, yikes. And then moving on, bunch of things happen in the first movie, but eventually the Duel of the Fates happens, and the reason why it's called Duel of the Fates is because it's the fate of Anakin Skywalker. It's Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul, and unfortunately, the fate of Anakin is pretty much sealed when Qui-Gon gets killed by Maul, because at this point, like, Qui-Gon was a father figure to Anakin. Qui-Gon was 100% willing to just say, screw the Jedi Code, I'm going to train this boy myself. And like, even against the council's wishes, and unfortunately he died. And when he died, he basically swore to Obi-Wan, like, hey, the boy is the chosen one, the one fated to bring balance to the Force. Everything seems to be lining up. It's like, I need you to train this child. And he's like, okay, as a last wish for my master, I will train the boy.
So I have two questions for both of you. One is, so do you think that, like, Qui-Gon Jinn dying is like one of the most underrated turning points of the whole Star Wars Skywalker saga? And then two, with that, how come Obi-Wan didn't completely fill that role of like a Qui-Gon, in a sense, even though he was there with him the entire time with Anakin?
Yeah, I think to your first question, certainly, yes. I think it's more recognized perhaps in our generation of Star Wars fans. But I think it is a really important pivotal moment. And that quote sort of that Meech is quoting there is Dave Filoni has a really awesome kind of quote and perspective about the whole story of how Duel of the Fates for Anakin. But really that feeds into the second question, because I think with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, they have two very different approaches to the Force, even though Obi-Wan is the Padawan of Qui-Gon, and of course Qui-Gon passed on everything that he knew to Obi-Wan. Everyone kind of still has their own identity of how they relate to the Force and who they are as a Jedi. And so Qui-Gon was very much more of like the living Force in the moment, whereas Obi-Wan is more of the like, I know there's like probably a better
by the book
with it, but like, yeah, he's very much a by the book. He's more of the like true Jedi Knight, like mindful of the future, not so much at the moment. Like, that's one of the bigger quotes of episode 1, right? It's Master Yoda says I should be mindful of the future, but not at the expense of the present, is the response from Qui-Gon. And so I think there's a lot of lessons, obviously, that Obi-Wan learns from Qui-Gon, but where Qui-Gon might have more adequately steered Anakin is that Qui-Gon has a bit of a defiant, rebellious nature, which is why he's not on the Jedi Council. And because he plays the rules a bit fast and loose, it would probably have been a better fit for Anakin to have that kind of support. Now, that being said, there's a lot of ways that Obi-Wan does that for Anakin, but I think even the circumstances of how Obi-Wan became a Jedi Knight, like, yes, we know from the beginning of the first movie that he's pretty close to ready to be a Jedi Knight, but even the circumstances of like him losing his master and like not quite being maybe fully prepared to take on Anakin, although he does it because that's Qui-Gon's wishes, and he loves Anakin. We know that that relationship like is a fantastic relationship as it develops, and it's one of the biggest heartbreaks as we get to Anakin's fall. But I think that there's a difference between like the brother figure and the father figure, and I think like Qui-Gon would have been the true father, and whereas Anakin sort of sees Obi-Wan as a father-esque figure, Obi-Wan sees Anakin as a brother, and so it's kind of like a interesting relationship. But I guess the short answer to prevent from rambling on any further is that they just have different ways that they engage and interact with the Force, and Qui-Gon's kind of identity of who he is as a Jedi may have been better suited for some of the instability that Anakin then faces.
Yeah, I mean, she pretty much hit the nail on the head, but essentially it all boils down to like, again, like how their personalities and how they're trained. And yeah, I said Qui-Gon is kind of like he was kind of like more well equipped to be able to deal with Anakin, like especially as we're looking back on it now, seeing like how Anakin like turned out with Obi-Wan. It's like, oh yeah, but then you see like how Qui-Gon's character is like, oh yeah, he definitely would have been able to kind of like be able to either let Anakin be like more free with his emotions rather than in the case of Obi-Wan kind of like have him stifle it, kind of like stifle it back down, or even like it's like, hey, chill out with that, or like reprimand him. Actually, yeah, and that was like another thing. Like, and one of the things we're gonna like bring up when we get to episode 2 is just how much Anakin feels like, yeah, Obi-Wan's a brother type figure, but he feels like he always feels like he has something to prove to Obi-Wan. And that's kind of like a big thing about it too. It's like, hey, when you feel like you need to like prove something to someone, your mindset gonna be way different. You're gonna be trying to like up the ante like every single time, and eventually it's gonna crash and burn. And I say that completely pun, not fully intended in that whatsoever with the burn part. But yeah, episode 2, y'all. Episode 2. So now we cut to 10 years later. We get a teenage Anakin Skywalker. And basically, in the interim of them 10 years, Obi-Wan's been training Anakin, and Anakin's like, of course, like he's having like a rough time with the Jedi temp, like with the other Jedi students. They're like, oh yeah, this is the kid that can't control his emotions. And he's like, oh word, I can't control my emotions? Let me show you what emotions can do. And nearly stabbed like a bunch of kids to death, but that's neither here nor there. He was just showing off. Anakin did nothing wrong. And so yeah, it was just like training, and then just as I mentioned before, just like Obi-Wan's like trying to teach him, but at the same time also like, hey, trying to like temper his like his rebellious side, and temper like his emotions and whatnot, try to suppress them. It's like, hey, Jedi shouldn't feel these things. And unfortunately, this gets tested in the wrong way possible when you get a teenage Anakin dealing with Padme once again, the love of his life, and he's like, and now they're like, oh yeah, so Amidala, she nearly got assassinated, so we're gonna need a Jedi to accompany her, and we're just going to assign the person who we all know have a crush on her, and we're just gonna send them to the most romantic planet possible of Naboo, and things are totally gonna work out just fine for Anakin. And obviously that does not work out well for the Jedi Code at all, because this man is thirsty. When I say he was thirsty, he was thirsty. And like he out here cutting pears, sending pears over to her with the Force. He's talking about like how he Like he's in love with her. He don't like sand. It's coarse. It's rough. It's irritating. It gets everywhere. You know what I'm saying? He rizzing her up, but within the rizzing, we start noticing some pretty interesting things. Number one, firstly, we see like how he's been like developing kind of like a friendship slash relationship with one Chief Palpatine, uh, which is definitely gonna not come back and bite him later. And then also we have him having pretty much kind of like reservations with the Jedi a bit. Specifically Obi-Wan's like he feels like he's like again, he feels like Obi-Wan's jealous of him. Like, oh yeah, like it's like he feels like Obi-Wan's keeping him held back, you know, feels like he's keeping him on a leash. And then also at the same time, he's also kind of starting to have visions of his mother dying on Tatooine.
So kind of with that, Jamie, a question for you is like, do you think if the Jedi actually allowed themselves to have, I know it's not just purely emotions, but like attachments and kind of dealing with that, do you think it would just like work out better, or would they have even more like Jedi falling to the Sith if they do allow a more emotional Jedi per se?
You know, I think that's an interesting question, because obviously, if we were to go the extended universe route, we know that when Luke reforms the Jedi Temple and then builds his own kind of Jedi Order, that attachments are not forbidden, and that seems to, I mean, in some ways, not go too much differently than the way that the original Jedi Order went. In some cases, also doesn't seem like it too much in the other way. So, I mean, whatever. Where I fall on this, though, is I don't know that it's so much an attachment. I think that Anakin's experience, and we especially start to see it show up in the second episode, but Anakin's experience really highlights how inept the Jedi are at dealing with grief. Because grief is really the underlying theme here for his life, that like he has to leave his mom, and then Qui-Gon dies, and then his mom dies, and then like all these other things happen that he doesn't emotionally have to deal with because he's 19, right? Like he comes to Jedi when he's 9. He's a 19-year-old when his mom dies. Like no 19-year-old knows, especially a 19-year-old boy, knows how to handle that in like a sane, normal way. And so I think that really what it comes down to is, I don't know if it's necessarily allowing attachments per se. I think it's more, how can we support our Jedi in the things that they're experiencing? Because ultimately, he was dealing with a lot of pain and internal suffering that was being glanced over by those around him. I think with the exception of, you know, I think Obi-Wan tried. I think that he, again, in his love for Anakin, I think he tried to comfort him. But then again, I think that Obi-Wan might have always had this maybe fear either of kind of his own ability to actually be able to train Anakin, because he recognized Anakin's power, and maybe he was a little bit afraid of Anakin's power, because we also know from some of the like extra non-movie material that Anakin progressed very quickly, which would have been very liking to kind of those around him. And we also know that Palpatine started trying to pull the strings very early, which is exactly what he did when he suggested that Obi-Wan be the one to come and protect Padme. That was absolutely a Palpatine string that he was pulling to try to set all of this in motion. So I think that you have the combination not only of Palpatine manipulating from the beginning all of the things that Anakin's feeling and dealing with, and sort of amplifying them so that they have to come to this boiling point, and the Jedi not adequately being equipped to be like, okay, you're suffering and you're going through a lot. How can we actually support you in it, instead of just being like, pull yourself together, kid, and be a Jedi? I don't know. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's my thought.
It is like just the Jedi needing to keep a therapist on standby, essentially, to deal. But the dealing with grief was an excellent point, considering the fact the loss that he had. Something meets, again, tying it back to Dr. Doom, who was first, is that they both lost their mother, which was a big turning point for both characters, where for Doom, that sent him over the deep end, and for Anakin, that was the beginning of
very destabilizing for him.
So you
very
can
destabilizing.
Progress from there.
All right, so from there, yeah, as you mentioned, like he does lose his mother, and he takes that as well as anybody should by completely massacring the entire tribe that his mother was killed by. all the women and the children too. And then confesses that to Padme and confesses his love for her. Yeah, he totally took that completely well at all. And Padme totally did not get the red flag moment because hey, they fell in love with each other. They confessed their love for each other. Even though Padme's like, no, we can't be together while wearing wearing a very seductive dress, I'm not gonna lie. And it's like, bro, you are really tempting this man.
That's marketing.
Bruh.
She wasn't tempting him. She was tempting the viewers.
Just no. Just
That's
no.
what they put her in for.
I know, but bruh.
Gosh.
All right, moving on before somebody gets canceled. So yeah, essentially at the end of it, Anakin ends up encountering Count Dooku, the next apprentice of Darth Sidious, and he fights him with two blades at one point and gets his right hand chopped off. All because of the fact, like, hey, he wasn't ready and he was too arrogant to see that and got a limb chopped off partially because of it against a very superior former Jedi. I was about to say Jedi. That was crazy.
That being said, he did still last longer than Obi-Wan. So again, we are starting to see his skills sort of take their own form. And yes, he's 19. So yes, he still has some arrogance problems. That's kind of the recurring theme in this episode. But, he's starting to be able to back it up, even if it costs him. I think the other comment I'd like to throw in here too is that his relationship with Padme is one of the more equalizing things I think that he has, because there is a way that she is able to sort of talk edge and balance him out. And I think that, again, she is one of the people, and maybe this is why their relationship goes the way that it does. She is one of the few people who is a place that he's actually allowed to feel all of the painful things that he's feeling. And she just accepts him as he is and tries to comfort him in that instead of like try to guide him in some different direction. It's more just like, oh, here's what you're feeling. Well, here's another perspective, in the moments where he's like thinking Obi-Wan's holding him back. She kind of has this counter of like, well, mentors see us and maybe see the things we don't like to see in ourselves. And then when he's, talking about how he slaughtered all of the Tusken Raiders, I think that in that moment, she doesn't run away because she sees the pain that's under all of it. And like, yeah, she's a little horrified by what he did. I think that she sees what's going on underneath it, and that's why she sticks around.
It's a red flag.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I didn't say it's not, but I'm saying I think
red flag alert.
Her choice.
Yeah. And now we get into the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars has fully begun. Oh yeah, Anakin and Padme got married in secret. Yes, Anakin did get a robotic arm. And now he's fully participating in a whole galactic war against the Separatists, in which the Clone Wars TV show happens. A lot of great things about it, but here are some of the key highlights. Number one,
all of the war crimes.
Dang, just not even gonna let me build it up. Not even gonna let me build up to the war crimes.
That's the biggest thing in the Clone Wars. You watch the Clone Wars and it's just war crime. Anyway, continue.
All right, number one, he gets himself a brand new apprentice. Yes, a Jedi Knight getting an apprentice hadn't been done before. But her name is Ahsoka Tano, and she is kind of like a key point for Anakin because, like, not only does it allow Anakin to grow as a teacher himself and slowly and like semi mellowing out a bit, but also she matches his energy, sometimes exceeding it, and it creates like one of the most comedic and most hilarious trios of all time because it's basically Obi-Wan babysitting two Anakins, and just Anakin dealing with a mini version of himself, and it's almost ironic. It's like, is this what Obi-Wan has to go through when dealing with me? Yes, yes, it is, sir. But throughout that, like, you see, like, again, he creates like a very deep and loyal relationship with them, with her, and it also leads to some problems. well, and a few of them include let's see, with his growing disillusionment with the Jedi. And there's a few instances where, like, besides all the war crimes that are happening, thank you very much for spoiling in advance. Just a whole bunch of things. Just him doing the Geneva checklist. And it's also the fact, like, you see him start slowly but surely liberally force choking folks with the dark side. Yep, kind of a bad sign. And him giving into his anger in his fights a lot of times. Yeah, you know it's bad. And you know it's bad whenever in the TV show the Imperial March starts playing whenever Anakin does something. And that lets you know, like, ooh, was that Vader slowly coming out? It's like, kinda was. But yes, his disillusionment with the Jedi. Incident number one, probably like one of the main ones, was the fact when Obi-Wan faked his own death and kept it a secret from Anakin and Ahsoka, because Anakin nearly went on a war path because
he went on a revenge spree, hardcore.
He went on a war path because because Obi-Wan, he had to replace a bounty hunter, so he fakes his own death. And then he turned himself into the bounty hunter. Anakin did not know any of this, and he nearly killed Obi-Wan because of it. But he's like, but yeah, so, and then of course when he finds out that, like, hey, it was really Obi-Wan and, like, this was a plot by the Jedi, ooh, he like, bro, I somewhat lost some trust in y'all. And then probably the biggest incident is the framing of Ahsoka, where essentially Ahsoka gets framed for a bombing at the Jedi Temple, and the Jedi immediately blame her, like, don't even take her side at all. And like Anakin, like, literally, again, he goes on a war path, and yeah, it proves, like, hey, this man will go out of his way for his loved ones. Like, he will, like, if he's one of the few people that you want in his corner, because once your corner, because he is loyal. And if he is loyal, he will commit heinous activities just to ensure that you're good.
Even to you, if he thinks you're too close to one of his friends.
Again, that's what you get for talking to Padme. But but that's neither here nor there. That's neither here nor there. But yeah, so big incident, like, yeah. So Jedi, like, immediately we're like, hey, Ahsoka's about to get executed. And then when it's proven that she's innocent, the Jedi Council don't even apologize. They just go like, oh yeah, hey, this was just an amazing test for you but it was the will of the Force, and you persevered. Hey, welcome back to the Jedi Order. And Ahsoka's like, nah, I'm out. Because even she saw, like, hey, the Jedi Council, they be on one. So yeah, they be on ones. And like, even when Anakin's like, hey, I need you, which again, like, goes to show, like, how big their relationship's gotten, because he didn't even want her at the beginning, and now he's like, hey, I need you, please stay with me. But unfortunately, she still leaves, and he's hurt over it. Probably like one of the other times, like, he experienced, like, true loss. He lost his apprentice, and
so like, that would be the third biggest loss in his life, like in sequential order, essentially.
Yeah.
At the time, yeah.
At this time, yes. That's the third biggest loss that he got, is, like, losing his apprentice because the Jedi Order are a bunch of numbskulls.
Yeah.
I think it's important also to point out this era of the Clone Wars. First of all, Anakin basically becomes the permanent hero of the Republic. And so in spite of the fact that he's doing all of these things, the Jedi, in their now war machine mind, because of what the Clone Wars has done to them, don't really do anything to stop it. They don't really try to redirect him. It's kind of like, okay, great, you keep being successful. Woohoo, you're ours. Like, whatever. That's kind of their perspective. And of course, you know, Obi-Wan, being so close to him, sees something that I think sometimes he tries to kind of steer him. But you know, he just comes to success so fast. And even by the time that we're in the Clone Wars, again, Anakin's like in his early 20s at this point. So he's still, I mean, if we want to talk about like human frontal cortex maturation that doesn't happen until you're 25, he doesn't even have a mature frontal cortex yet. And he's now like literally one of the biggest figures in the entire Galactic Republic. So there's that side.
Leading armies.
And I do think, yeah, literally. But I mean, so is Ahsoka at like 16. So, you know, such is the like Jedi pattern that we've got going on in the Clone Wars here. But anyway, so I think additionally, I don't think it's possible to overstate how significant the trial of Ahsoka is, because I think of all of the arcs in the Clone Wars, that is probably the most significant one, contributing to what happens with Anakin following the events of the Clone Wars as we get into episode 3. And especially when they release season 7 of the Clone Wars and all of the events that happened in 7, when Ahsoka like sort of pops back into the picture and Anakin thinks she's going to come back and he saved her lightsaber for her and like all these things. He's like ready to welcome her back with open arms. And then the Siege of Mandalore and Order 66 happen and it all shatters and falls. But I think it can't be overstated how Anakin's loyalty, how much he loved Ahsoka, the fact that he stood by her no matter what, and he was the only one. Like, I think there's probably Yoda and Obi-Wan, I think, are the ones that stayed on her side in this, because, you know, from those episodes, the council was divided on things, but they had, you know, unfortunately went with the majority. And so I think really I just really don't think we can overstate how significant that event was, not only for continuing to show Anakin that the Jedi Order is not reliable, because he's kind of already experienced that himself. He already feels like the Jedi don't really trust him, even though he's been in this major prominent position, and because Palpatine's pulling the strings to make him think that behind the scenes. But when Ahsoka goes through what she goes through and then walks away, I think that's the biggest thing, because once they win the victory and Anakin kind of wins the day, quote unquote, but still doesn't get what he wants, and Ahsoka still walks away, that's a really significant moment, that it's not just that the Jedi didn't trust her, it's the fact that like Anakin did everything he could to prove her innocence, and he did, and she still walked away. And a conversation for another day is how beautiful of a foil example that is for religious trauma, but we won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But I think it's just a really complex situation that, again, continues to destabilize kind of where he's at as he continues to lose these really important people around him.
All right, Meech, can you speed us through episode 3 on the transition into Vader?
Man, I can't speedrun nothing when it comes to Anakin. All right, so here we go.
We got bedtimes, like we.
Yeah, forget bedtimes. I'm fully alert right now. All right, so episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, aka the downfall of the Jedi and the tragedy of Anakin. So, all right, so we got Anakin and Obi-Wan. They're going to rescue Sheev from General Grievous. Yes, I'm only calling him Sheev right now, because he on one. And he goes and he fights Dooku. And at this point, like Anakin, he's fully into himself. They're fighting Dooku. Obi-Wan gets knocked out, and with that, like Anakin gives into his anger, especially like at Dooku's behest, like, hey, you got anger, you got power, you don't use it. And Anakin immediately uses his anger to get the upper hand, cuts off both of Dooku's hands, and then at the behest of Sheev, who keeps egging him on to like, hey, kill him, do it now, do it. Bam, decapitates Dooku, and you see the look of remorse on Anakin's face immediately. He's like, I shouldn't have done that. It's not the Jedi way. So he's still trying to still continuing to be a Jedi, but as the novelization of Revenge of the Jedi goes, not Revenge of the Jedi, Revenge of the Sith goes, is that like he's like, hey, this war had basically taken its toll on him, and he's like really desperate to end it. So of course they escape, they're successful and all that good jazz. He learns Padme's pregnant, and then immediately afterwards he starts having nightmares of her dying in childbirth, which is like, whoa, because of course this is immediately is gonna like trigger him, because you're gonna immediately have him think back to his mother, and that's what he does. He thinks that like, hey, I had visions of my mom dying. I'm not gonna let it happen to you. So yeah, and then all this time, like again, Sheev, he's like whispering in Anakin's ears. He's also like, hey, it's like, hey, I'm appointing you to be like my representative on the council. So like that gets Anakin a little bit hyped up. Is like, oh, okay, I get to be on the council. I get to be a Jedi Master. And according to novelization, like that allowed me to get into the Jedi archives, so that way I can research like ways to keep Padme from dying. Also, at the same time, he went to Yoda, and Yoda was like, hey, when it comes to people dying, firstly, you should learn to let go of the things that you wish to lose. Instead, you should be rejoicing from the fact that they get to join the Force. That is not the answer Anakin wants to hear right now. All right. And then going even a little bit further, he's now at the council and like, oh yeah. And Windu, of course, the man who the big hater he is. I know he's not officially a hater because like it'll say like he was gonna make him a master at a certain point, but that didn't happen. So here's what happened. He's on the council, but he's not a Jedi Master. Anakin has actually has a whole temper tantrum over it, and then sits down and pouts. Obi-Wan's like, hey, just think of it like this. You're one of the strongest, wisest Jedi I know. You're like one of my greatest friends. And like, you got on the council at such a young age. It's only a matter of time before you become a master. Also, we need you to spy on Sheev. And like, why are you doing this on me? Because because we noticed like you're getting close with him, and also the fact like Sheev ain't giving up his powers throughout this whole war. So we kind of need to figure out what this man is doing. And Anakin's not going along with that at all. Also, the fact is that every night he has those same nightmares of the same vision of Padme dying. So he essentially stops sleeping and instead uses the Force to keep himself up. So his mental faculties are not there right now.
So I have a question for the both of you. Do you think if Anakin became a Jedi Master, would that fix him, solve him? Because sometimes it's easy for us to think that whatever the thing is that we desire the most, whether that be wealth, whether that be a position of power, status, the new house, new car, marriage, or whatever, that's going to fix us and make us whole. So do you think that would have made him whole in a sense?
No. Short answer is no. I think by this point, his roots of mistrust are so deep that like, I think if he was made a master, I think it's a lose-lose, really, because if he's made a master, I think he sinks deeper into Sidious's pocket / Palpatine's pocket. But like, even with what happened, he's sinking deeper into Palpatine's pocket. So like, I think at the point in time that they're at, I don't think there's a way that it goes that gets better, because I'm going to bring back my unpopular opinion that Mace Windu is the worst. Because I really think that Mace Windu's contributions to this whole story is a lot of what drives Anakin ultimately to the dark side. Because Mace is always the one who's kind of like the naysayer. He's the one being vocal about how he doesn't trust Anakin. And even if Anakin doesn't hear that directly, like he's still saying that to other people. And even when Anakin like figures out that it is Palpatine, that is Darth Sidious, and like is needed, honestly, and like, sure, it was probably a good call maybe to not leave him in his unstable state, like going with Sidious, but like, I don't know, just their whole dynamic and the way that Mace Windu always handled Anakin is, I think, a really considerable driving factor of why he doesn't trust the Jedi Order, and especially the Jedi Council so much. Because you look at his other relationships, I think that, he seeks out Yoda because Yoda is one of his better relationships. We know he's got a great relationship with Obi-Wan, even though this assignment starts to make him even question his trust in Obi-Wan. But like, I think Mace Windu is the single greatest obstacle to him in his relationship with the Jedi Council. So again, short answer is no, that would not change anything.
So I think when it comes to that, like in terms of the Jedi archives, they have not found a way to keep somebody from dying. no, I am not looking at force healing from the sequel that does not exist. Okay, so I don't think like in fact, like the only time they figured out about conquering death was through Qui-Gon. All right, through Qui-Gon and becoming one with the living force and become one with the force and keeping your consciousness. That was their solution. And as such, I feel like if Anakin like became a master and he saw that it's not like they didn't really have any solutions. Ooh, well, time to go learn about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. That's what his solution probably would go to. And but yeah, so I'm not gonna get into Mace Windu because it's not his episode. All right.
So let's get into the domestic abuse.
Dang. All right.
Okay,
So
real quick. Before we get to that point, I think it's really important to also point out that Anakin at this point, he's still very much wrestling with like what his identity in the middle of all of this is, right? Because we see, from the beginning, like he immediately recognizes, oh, I shouldn't have done that when I killed Dooku. And then like he is wrestling with like even the different interaction he has with Palpatine. Like he wants to be a loyal friend to Palpatine and feels really weird about what the Jedi want him to do. But then when he's confronted by Palpatine at the opera about like the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise and like what Sith and Jedi are and how Sidious, Palpatine's basically like thing, and Anakin's like, no, the Jedi are selfless. Still very much like holds to this identity of what a Jedi is, but I think inside of him he's wrestling with the two sides of it, so that even when he figures out who Palpatine is, we see he very much wants to do the right thing, which is why he, first of all, I mean, in respects, I kind of wish he would have just killed him on the spot because that would have made things a whole blur. But at the same time, like he very much wanted to do the right thing. He went to like turn in Sidious and then wanted to like help take him down. But because he's got this like earwig in the back of his mind put there by Palpatine about how Palpatine's the only one who can help him save Padme, even though we know that's a lie. He's got this in the back of his mind where he's like, okay, I want to do the right thing, but I need this too. So he's kind of like trying to play both sides of the coin. And we see that he doesn't really fall one way or another until he's so desperate that he feels like he has to have this other thing that's about to be taken from it. So I think he doesn't really, Obi-Wan's about to say at some point that, Anakin becomes the new apprentice after he kills Dooku. But I really think he's waffling even after he like kills Mace Windu. Like he's still kind of waffling with who he is. So anyway, we can proceed now.
Yep. And we can even like proceed like kind of after that point of like, hey, going to turn in Sheev, and then of course like comes to the critical moment, if you will. So afterwards, like after Windu tells like, hey, you should stay in the council chambers, Anakin immediately disobeys and goes to the moment where he sees like Windu is about to kill Palpatine. He's like, no, I need him. And also like, hey, you're about to like, it's like, hey, you're about to also break the Jedi code, which you've been harping at me about. And it's like, and he makes the choice to slice off Windu's arm, and Palpatine gives him unlimited power, shoots him out of a window, which Mace Windu totally survives. He's like, I pledge myself to you. Please help me save Padme's life. Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader. So, yes, Anakin fully turns to the dark side in this moment and is now Darth Vader. He is like, hey, your main mission is to go run up on the Jedi Temple, murder all the Jedi inside, which include all the younglings, stabbing people right in the chest, like a certain Reva, and then also, hey, go to Mustafar to take care of all the separatist loose ends that we got. And also one thing you notice that like after he's done massacring a bunch of people, of course he had the Sith eyes while he was doing it, but afterwards his eyes are back to normal and he's actually crying, basically lamenting over like where he was, like all the things that he's led to at this point. And he's basically has like tears in his eyes and like he's like, hey, gots to keep going, my boy.
Yeah.
Which is why I want to make a quick counterpoint that I really don't think that it's until after the duel with Obi-Wan when he gets absolutely fried and then fully comes into the suit. I really don't think it's until that moment that he fully becomes Darth Vader, because yeah, he commits himself, quote unquote, to Sidious's teachings, but I think that's because he's in such a panic that he's like, what did I just do? I don't know what else to do other than like, you just saw this happen, you're telling me you can help me, so whatever, I guess we're gonna do this. But yeah, he's like crying in remorse of his decision. He's just has so much pain and fear that's driving all the things right now that I still feel like, yeah, he's kind of gone to the dark side, and yes, we're seeing that side start to take over, but I really don't think that the deal's fully sealed until we actually see him in the Vader suit. And when Palpatine tells him that Padme's dead, I think that's really the moment that seals it for him, because really, I think that Anakin doesn't die until Padme dies. So I guess I can kind of take over the bridge for that point. So obviously we get to Mustafar, and then Padme, in a last-ditch effort, is trying to go pull him back, as she does, but then Obi-Wan stows away, and that ends really badly for Padme, because then Anakin accuses Padme of basically being on the side of Obi-Wan. And it's just, yeah, that, and also basically like just being an enemy of Anakin, also like all the above. And so, yes, obviously in his like totally unbalanced, whatever the word you want to use it as, state, he then force chokes Padme because he thinks that she's lying to him, because he's just literally lost his ability to trust anything and anyone outside of the man who's been manipulating him for almost his whole life. And so she collapses, even though we know from later Anakin says she was alive. I felt it. Like, yeah, I did this really horrible thing, but like I could never kill her because I love her, whatever weird relationship that is. But anyway, so then
Red flag relationship.
Yeah. So then we have the duel of all duels in all of the Star Wars saga between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and like probably just this whole Mustafar series of scenes is the most heartbreaking, I think, in all of Star Wars, because we start with Anakin and Padme's relationship falling apart, but really I think the dagger fully goes through all of the hearts of the audience when we have kind of that final confrontation with Obi-Wan and Vader, where it's like, you were my brother, I loved you, like you were the chosen one, you were supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them, balance to the Force, all these things. And then we end with this like, I loved you, I hate you. It's this whole thing. Supposedly there's an alternate script where originally Anakin was supposed to like beg for help or whatever from Obi-Wan in that scene, which again highlights that he's not totally all the way dark yet, but they changed it last minute, I think because of different things or whatever. But anyway, still an incredibly heartbreaking scene. Obviously Obi-Wan takes the lightsaber, leaves, he catches fire and like gets all burned and stuff, and then we shift to Padme's delivering the babies while he's getting basically reincarnated as Vader. And I fully ascribe to the fan theory that Anakin survives because Palpatine is draining Padme's life force to put it into Anakin to have him survive, and that's why Padme dies, because we know she's a fighter and she wouldn't just give up. But anyway, and that might also be why Anakin says he feels that she's alive, because her life force is actually now, in fact, inside of him.
Well, I think Anakin did it himself unconsciously.
I really don't.
I think he did it unconsciously. See, here's the reason why. Because of the fact that, all right, he said like, oh yeah, she was alive. I felt it. All right. What was he doing like in the midst of like feeling her like while he was alive? He was battling for it. He was battling he was battling Obi-Wan. Also, what would make it also kind of like more tragic is the fact that like, hey, like it would make it even more tragic. Like their fates are like so intertwined that like the secret to Sith, the secret to overcoming death with the Sith is draining the life of the one you love. It adds an even more horrific angle and more tragic angle to it. And also kind of like makes the whole line from Paladin like, hey, you killed her, kind of semi more.
See, I still think it's Sidious that does it. One, because I think he knows that if Padme's alive, there's always a chance that she can pull him back. And so like to really get Anakin fully sealed to the dark side, Padme has to die. Because again, I think the last bit of Anakin that's really Anakin dies with Padme. Two, I think that that scene where he says like, you killed her. And this, I have all of the like a bunch of the comics, and so there's a comic story actually that picks up right from this moment and takes on, and it very much shows that Sidious made that comment because he was purely trying to incite Vader to see what power he was capable of in the dark side in that moment. So I still think it's Palpatine that did it. But all that to say, we've now met our great tragedy. Anakin has fully stepped into Vader, whether he wanted to or not. And alas, our fate is sealed as we move forward into Rebels, Rogue One, Obi-Wan, and the original trilogy.
Yeah, so just kind of like, again, tying this back to Doom, we do see how obsession kind of leads both characters to it's just like amount of, oh, I need to do whatever it takes to get as much power as I can accumulate to, in the case of Doom, it's like we talked about, give world peace, but under my rule. And then even with Anakin and Vader, save Padme, which again, isn't a bad thing to want. Like he genuinely loved her, wanted to have a family and, had to keep that secret, became disillusioned with the Jedi. And it's like he wanted this very good thing, but it just kept turning him, and taking Palpatine, who saw this and was always, like both you mentioned, was always manipulating him this entire time, just to, like, in that moment of truth, being able to manipulate him. So kind of a case of nature versus nurture, where it's like, okay, you lost one father figure, and then you got the dark father figure that stepped in and kind of just like moved you along. So with that, we get into his menace phase, where he is the terror among terrors.
The true GOAT, Darth Vader. He is him. He is the one. Let's see, probably one of the biggest things, of course, like throughout this time, like he's basically learning how to be a complete and total monster. Basically, like Palpatine's like, hey, you need to go get a lightsaber from a Jedi, kill one, get his lightsaber, bleed the crystal, and that is yours.
Pretty epic comic series too. Fun fact.
And that's literally how he gets his lightsaber. Like in fact, even when he tries bleeding it the first time, he gets like a vision of like him reforming, and he's like, nah, we doubling down on the dark side, and he bleeds it. Another big thing is the fact that like, he's training a bunch of Inquisitors or fallen Jedi in order to become his Inquisitors, and he's doing the ruthless method of teaching, which is lobbing off limbs, utterly destroying them in combat, so that way they can get angry and sufficient in the dark side themselves. But of course not strong enough to topple himself or Palpatine, be sure. Then we get like the Obi-Wan series, in which he finds out Obi-Wan's alive and is now single-minded warpath to absolutely get Obi-Wan. And when he finds him, he absolutely wrecks his life, because again, Obi-Wan's out of practice, and he's also experiencing a bunch of depression from the fact that he thought Anakin was dead and now he's alive. And he absolutely wants to make Obi-Wan suffer by having him burn in the fire. He's like, you will suffer like I did. Also, there's a moment where he ends up, and also his powers in the Force, like even though he lost his limbs, he's actually still very powerful because he's tapping into the dark side, making him at that point stronger than what he was in Episode 3. And then again, he's also like a single track mind. He manages to utterly decimate Reva in a pretty underrated show of him fighting without a lightsaber, until he eventually he just steals her lightsaber and just wrecks her with it, and then leads to the final confrontation with Obi-Wan, which is basically how Obi-Wan got his groove back. If you've seen that movie, and it leads to a very heartbreaking confrontation where Obi-Wan slashes one half of his mask, and Obi-Wan fully breaks down, apologizes to him for everything that's happened, and in a clever moment of potential clarity from Anakin, like Anakin absolves him, and is like, hey, I'm not your failure. You didn't kill Anakin, I did, before reverting back to Darth Vader. It's like, the same way I'm gonna destroy you. And it's like, hey, you live. It's like, and absolving Obi-Wan of his guilt, and Obi-Wan lets him go. They depart, and then Sidious manages to slap some sense into Vader, like, hey, so you done with this Obi-Wan mess? It's like, yes, I don't think about it anymore. I only serve you, my master. All right, cool. Moving on. In the reign of terror and menacedom, we got the things that he did to Cal Kestis in Jedi Fallen Order, and then what he does to Seer in Jedi Survivor. Good heavens, I don't want to talk about it anymore because
You get wrecked.
I had never been more scared in my entire life. Moving on, now we get to Rebels, where he just pops in. He's like, hey, I see all of you in the Empire, y'all messing up right now. This is how you show these rebels. This is how you show these rebels we're in charge. All right, he incites a riot on dang, I forgot the planet's name. He incites a riot, basically overthrows the leader, and she gets killed. And he manages to absolutely decimate both Kanan and Ezra. Also, Ahsoka, who's revealed to still be alive after Order 66. She senses that, oh, dang it, my master is Darth Vader. So she's in a tizzy. And then they eventually meet up again on a Malachor. They have an epic confrontation, but before they have a confrontation, you see a moment of Vader very rarely showing mercy by like, hey, we need not be adversaries. Emperor will show you mercy. Just tell us where all the other Jedi are. And then he's like, hey, perhaps this child tell me what you don't. And then Gabe's one of the best bards of all time. Hey, Anakin Skywalker was weak. I destroyed him, which shows the dichotomy between Anakin and Vader. Like, he wants to split the two so heavy that, like, hey, I'm Vader. I killed Anakin. Anakin's gone. And I am what remains. So him and Ahsoka fight. Ahsoka cracks the other half of his mask where she sees him. It's like, Anakin, I was like, I'm not going to leave you. And he says, then you'll die. And in the unaltered timeline, he absolutely does kill her. But then Ezra saves her in the World Between Worlds. Then we don't see him for the rest of Rebels. Cutting to Rogue One. Now he's just absolutely, again, he full on Vader. He out here telling Krennic, like, hey, you out here messing up the plans, my boy. You messing up this Death Star plans, my guy. You out here shooting up the lasers early? How dare you? As a matter of fact,
Careful not to choke on your aspirations.
Yeah, you choking on your aspirations? Get out of here. And then eventually he makes it to see the best scene in the entire movie, which is him absolutely decimating a bunch of rebels in a hallway. Had me cackling like a madman in the theater. No, I'm not well. I acknowledge that. And from there, right, he attacks a bunch of rebels, kills a bunch of them, but the Death Star plans still gets out of his grasp, and it leads directly into episode 4.
I have 2 quick questions. One is a comic book story. I didn't read it, but I think there's one where it's like he's, as Vader, trying to reawaken or like bring Padme back to life, and like sees her as a ghost or something like that, and then she fades away because he's dead. Is that right?
So so real quick, I do want to highlight a couple things in this era. First is that, thank goodness, in spite of what Disney has done, thank goodness for Obi-Wan, Rebels, and Rogue One, because they do actually give us a glimpse of like prime Vader that we don't really get in the original trilogy. So that's super nice. But how this feeds into your question is through the comics, through Obi-Wan, through Rebels, we still see that even in this Reign of Terror era, there's these glimpses of Anakin that are still there. So we know that like there's pieces of Anakin that still exist under the surface that sometimes are clawing to get out. So the comic books, for example, since you brought up the comics, the one that picks up immediately after episode 3 and like is the process of him bleeding his lightsaber. Like there's even a new one actually that he ends up like chasing the ghost of Padme because like basically Sabe looks like Padme and is posing as, there's a whole thing. But anyway, there's like in the process him trying to bleed this crystal, he keeps getting basically tormented by how he remembers the ghost or the spirit of Padme. I don't think it's her actual spirit, obviously, because contrary to what episode 9 would have you believe, people who are not Jedi do not incarnate as Force ghosts. So she would not be able to incarnate herself as a Force ghost. But he continues to be tormented by visions of her, by the of her. that just dig him deeper and deeper into remorse. There's even a comic book series where this one is a separate one, but he goes essentially mad chasing this vision of Padme, and eventually at the very end of it, he gets down on his knees and breaks down, and he says, because she like basically is trying to get him to admit what he did throughout this whole story, and he goes, okay, I did it, I did you, and I killed the child you carried, and I hate myself for what I've become. And then like her spirit kind of finally frees him, and then so there's like that storyline. There's other storylines where he just like is always kind of reaching for her and she disappears, so like that side of him is still very much there. But even looking at Obi-Wan, like the moment that we talked about where he kind of absolves Obi-Wan, that's Anakin that's still in there. Or when Ahsoka confronts him when they're on Malachor, that's Anakin for a moment. So like there's these glimpses of him that come out, so we know he's still in there, just as Padme said with her dying words, there's still good in him. They're so pushed down by how much guilt he's carrying, and he just kind of keeps digging deeper because it's the vicious cycle of guilt that like, well, I'm already this far and I might as well just keep going. So that's kind of how his relationship with Padme shows up in the comics, is more that like there's a few different iterations of it, but it's basically his memory of her spirit kind of continues to torment him just from his grief and guilt of what he did.
I think that answered it. And then just like to kind of follow up, the fact that with this era, kind of learning later about the rule of two, like the master and the apprentice, during his reign of terror, once he figures out, hey, Palpatine, you kind of didn't deliver on your promise. Obviously, we know what happens in 5-6, but like, why didn't he turn on Palpatine then? Because I feel like he could have took him out.
No, he could not.
There's moments where he tries, and Palpatine decisively puts him back in his place every time. This happens throughout the comics. But Palpatine basically their relationship changes dramatically once Anakin turns to the dark side, because whereas he was sort of a supportive mentor that you see, which is really just him being manipulative, but whereas he presents himself as a supportive mentor, that completely changes after Anakin becomes Vader. He's abusive, he is domineering, he is every bit the name Sidious that he was given to Anakin.
That definitely helps for non-comic book people.
Don't forget the fact that that the way that Palpatine constructed Vader's suit, he made it so that he's particularly very weak to Force lightning, because remember, his suit is literally his life support system. So if it shorts out, he's gone. Not quickly, but he's still gonna die. So Sidious he purposely made it so like, hey, it's particularly weak to his Force lightning, and just zap and he's out.
And not to mention, there's a whole comic book storyline where Sidious basically orchestrates an assassination attempt against Vader as like basically a test of how strong he is in the Force. So these are the things that he does to essentially abuse him as he continues to be his master.
This is why we brought the two of you on, just to fill in the gaps for it. So now we get into like the two children coming in. So 4, 5, and 6, Mish.
All right, so by episode 4, okay, he's searching for Death Star plans. He captured Leia unknowingly, not knowing that that's his actual daughter. Spoiler alert. And essentially he just goes around. He force chokes one person for not having faith in the Force. Finds his lack of faith very disturbing, in fact. And then later on, he finds out Obi-Wan's alive. It's like, oh. And he's on the ship. It's like, oh, word? Let me go and run this fade. And lands the first lightsaber fight in cinema history, where Vader cuts down Obi-Wan, or Obi-Wan gives himself over to the Force. So that feud's done. Obi-Wan's gone. Vader should be happy, but he still got to deal with these rebels. So eventually, rebels go through the Death Star trench run. He's there. He gets shot by Han Solo. Spirals out into space. Death Star blows up. Episode 5 happens. He's on a warpath against the rebels. And also at this time, between 4 and 5, he learns that Luke is his son, and he's going out. He's basically like, hey, I need to get my son Luke, because he's trying to figure out the identity of the person who was the Death Star. Finds out it's his son. He wants him to join him, and they don't meet each other for like a while. Vader down happens. All I see are in this field are fear and dead men. Bar stuff happens. I'm not gonna get into that because we're slowly running low on time. We're moving along. Episode 5, he warpath. He manages to get to Cloud City. He manages to figure out like, oh yeah, okay, let me get to Lando Calrissian first. Also, these admirals keep felling me left and right, so I need to choke the mess out of all of them until they're dead.
Let me unknowingly torture my daughter's boyfriend.
And also accepting Captain Nita's apology. So yep, he does that. Yeah, Han Solo basically gets carbonated. Boom, he's out of the story. All right, now he sees Luke. Luke has finally decided to show up in this episode, and they fight, and all Vader's trying to do is to freeze Luke in carbonite so that way he can take him to the Emperor so they can complete the training. Fortunately, that does not happen, and instead he chops off Luke's hand, reveals like, I am your father. And Luke is like, join me so we can rule the galaxy as father and son. Luke says, nah, I'm out, dips, escapes by falling, gets caught by Leia while Vader basically is in melancholy mode, just like thinking like, Luke, come on, son, you're literally my son, you my blood, come to the dark side, blood. But yeah, so, and now episode 6, the big episode. This episode basically construction Death Star 2, and at this point Luke basically revealed to Leia like, hey, we're siblings, Yoda's dead, so literally Luke is the last Jedi unless you count Cal Kestis and Ezra Bridger and Ahsoka Tano and Sabine Wren. Oh wait, not Sabine yet. My bad. That's a little bit later. So Luke's the last Jedi that you know of at the time of the movie, and like Luke's trying to convert his dad back. Vader trying to convert Luke to the dark side. Luke's like, hey, Luke turns himself over, is like, hey, come with me, father. Like I can sense the light and the conflict within you. I can sense Anakin trying to come back out. And Vader's like, nah, Anakin is dead. You don't know how strong Sidious is. I must obey my master. My father is truly dead. Gets called back by Obi-Wan. It's like, my friend is truly dead. Then it gets to the Emperor's throne room where Sidious eggs Luke's into the dark side, to which he and Vader start fighting. Luke is again trying to convince his dad, like, hey, I can sense the conflict. And then Vader's like, there is no conflict. And then he eventually learns, like, hey, oh wait, you got a sister? And, all right, Luke, if you ain't gonna join the dark side, then she will. Causes Luke to go over the edge, join the dark side. Well, not join the dark side, uses the dark side to cut off Vader's hand, the exact same one. I bet you Vader's like, man, if I had a nickel for every time, or if I had a credit for every time I lost it, and from there, Luke literally sees everything happening, and he's like, Sidious is like telling him like, hey, kill your father, join me, be my apprentice, rule the galaxy. Luke's like, nah, I'm a Jedi like my father before me. And Sidious like, I bet I'm gonna kill you. Force lightning. And all the time,
the Jedi of the past started speaking.
No.
Chill.
And Padme's dying words take their fruition, and Luke does exactly what he was born to do and brings his father back to the light side. And that is it. End of story.
Chill out with that. So yes, Vader sees his son dying. He's like, nah, picks up Sidious, throws him down a reactor shaft. He gets blasted with all the lightning. He's like, I'm dying, son. Listen, let me look at you with my own eyes. Removes the mask. He sees like they're seeing each other eye to eye, or they're seeing things eye to eye, if you listen to each other now. But and then he dies. He dies seeing his son for the first and last time with his own eyes, and he joins the Force, the living Force, alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda. Probably a very awkward meeting, but in any case, that's the
But
death
the
and
that loved him the whole time anyway. So, good choice.
let's see, killed one. And you know what? We're not gonna talk about it. But
Okay, but that's the age-old
but
debate. Did he really kill Obi-Wan, or did Obi-Wan have himself go one with the Force? I think that's our debate here. But alas, for another time.
then Ahsoka happens. All right.
Okay, wait. Time out. Before we do that, a couple quick things I want to highlight from the era we just talked about of the original and immediately preceding the original trilogy. So the first thing that I just cannot ever get over is Leia. Okay, Bail Organa, I don't know how he got away with keeping Leia's identity a secret, because Leia is like spitting image footsteps of Padme. Okay, so like there's no way that Anakin did not see Leia, because they interacted with each other thoroughly before we ever see episode 4, because Leia starts being a member of like the Senate and the Council and all that stuff around Padme's age when she joined politics, which is like 13, 14. We see that in Rebels. And so as she's sort of being brought up, we know that she actually met Palpatine with Organa at various points, with Bail Organa at various points, and Vader was there. And so we know that they've crossed paths before. It just astounds me every time. How did you not see, or maybe he did see Padme, but like, was so closed off from his pain that didn't recognize the connection that like she literally is like you if Padme was you. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I can't ever get over that. So that's a significant event. But then I think other things with this era is, again, when we have Leia and Luke start to come onto the scene, again, we start to see, well, first of all, Leia, of course, got all the better qualities of both of her parents. So, Luke kind of got the short end of the stick. But the one most important thing that he gets is Padme's heart, I believe, and really Padme's faith that Anakin can be saved. And I think that starts to really draw kind of the Anakin bits back to the surface to give them power to take hold. And I think the conversation in episode 6 that they have on Endor right before Vader takes Luke to see Sidious, every time in that scene, it's my personal theory that Anakin's having flashbacks to Mustafar when Padme's begging him to run away with her, because Luke is saying exactly the same thing, essentially, that Padme was saying in that moment. And I think that for him, his response is more of like a remorse at that point, where it's like, I don't think he wants to even follow Sidious at that point. But again, it's like, must have been my master. You don't understand. Like, it's a flashback of like, he's kind of getting doubly hounded with like, here's my son making exactly the same plea that his mother made to me 23 years ago. And I don't know. I think that that's a really poignant, significant moment. So, and alas, it is Padme's words that win the day, and Anakin comes back to us as Anakin. All right, Ahsoka.
Yeah, all right, Ahsoka. So, as we all know, Anakin is dead. But because he's one with the Force, he's still around. And by this point, he basically is now fully embraced his role as the father from Mortis, basically in the world between worlds. So here's what happened. Ahsoka basically got her behind whooped by Balin's skull, and pretty much died. Pretty much. Like roughly, yeah, she pretty much died. And she ends up waking up in the world between worlds, where Anakin's there, and he's like, hey, I'm here and you're here, so I can teach you one last lesson. And that lesson is live or die. And they essentially, like, of course they had some banter beforehand, but it's like, your lesson is to live or die. He ignites his blue lightsaber and they fight before he sends her into a flashback of the Clone Wars, and in which she's like back in her child state. She's having flashbacks of the Clone Wars, and essentially like they're having a conversation like, hey, I was a child, like Ahsoka's a child soldier in this war, and I was raised to be a soldier. Is that all I'm ever gonna be? And Anakin's like, hey, what do you want from me? Do you want me to tell you like, oh yeah, I wish things could be different. Oh yeah, I wish you been raised different. Like, no, I taught you how to survive, and taught how to survive he did. Because of course, like cutting to more flashbacks of the Siege of Mandalore, and he's like, hey, I didn't I don't remember this fight. It's like, yeah, you weren't here for it. And if you were, things might have been much different in this galaxy. But essentially, like, Ahsoka is essentially like airing out her grievances and her insecurities to Anakin about the fact, like, hey, I was like I was trained by you. And like you said, like, hey, Anakin's like, hey, you are like, I gave you everything I know. Like, I'm like, you are my legacy. Like, I'm everything about you. And he's like, yeah, you are. But you know who you also are? You also were Vader. All right. You also nearly killed me. All right. And I can't get over that. Like, I'm basically, her main insecurity is the fact, like, she's scared that like, if she teaches Sabine, that she's gonna end up in that same legacy as Vader. Like, somebody's turning to the dark side, whether it's her or Sabine, and she can't reconcile that. So Anakin's like, oh, was that all that's about? You're still on that? All right, you failed. You know what? I asked you a question, live or die. Ignites his red lightsaber, Sith eyes, gone Vader, and then they fight in a sequence in which I actually have choreographed and memorized, muscle memory, in fact, on both sides. So fight me. And and essentially, like, they fight, he's like, hey, it's time to die. You lack conviction. And she manages to, like, disarm him with the red blade. You see her eyes turn full Sith as well before she throws the blade away. It's like, hey, I choose to live. And Renee's like, there's hope for you yet, kid. And then he disappears, and she wakes up back to life as Ahsoka the White. Ahsoka the White, and the Ahsoka series ends with Anakin looking at her at a distance while she's stuck in the new galaxy.
All right. So final thoughts on Anakin / Darth Vader.
I think on the note of Ahsoka, obviously my full thoughts on all of this were when we actually did our Ahsoka review. But just to reiterate once again, Dave Filoni masterpiece of really beautifully bringing together all the parts of who Anakin is into one incarnation of him, right? Like that, fully stepping into the father who can balance both the daughter and the son, both the light and the dark. And him finally coming to a place where he is balanced, right? He spent so much of his life being unbalanced and like not really sure of who he was. And so finally coming to a place of like, both are me, like both things were me. I have both in me. I hold both in me. And yet neither one like truly defines me, just like in real life. Nobody is, in most cases, nobody is truly purely good or purely evil, right? People are just people. They make mistakes. Things happen. We try our best to good, but that's not always what ends up being the outcome. And so I think that it's really a beautiful picture of how all of those things can coexist in one person, and just the wholeness of holding all parts of yourself, I think, is the beautiful message of Ahsoka. And I love that that's where Anakin lands, right? Like that basically becomes his legacy. It's not as a fallen Jedi. It's not as a, menace of the dark side. It's as a whole, complete person who's come to peace about in himself. And of course, because this has become a hot, contentious topic in some circles since the sequel trilogy that we don't really talk about has come out, Anakin is and always will be the chosen one. And even straight from George Lucas's mouth himself, if you look at the years of his life, he brings balance to the Force in multiple ways. He is perfectly balanced, spending 23 years of his life in the light and 23 years of his life in the dark. And obviously he's perfectly balanced afterwards. And then, ultimately he does bring balance to shifting either into where it should be. So he is and always will be the chosen one. And yes, for that, I prefer to look at him more as a hero than a villain. But that is what it is.
H.
I say, like, my great analysis. Yes, he has done a lot of good. He also done so much evil, and yes, like, his iconography as a villain cannot be understated, as he's still seen as one of the greatest villains of all time. And in fact, that's why we're doing a massive villain saga. So we cannot ever denounce that. Yes, I see him as a hero too, but I will fully acknowledge that he is still a this man was evil, evil. But yeah, so when it comes to that, like again, his coolness factor says says enough. He is like again most recognizable. He's also been yeah like one of the most recognizable villains of all time. Actually, one of the most recognizable characters of all time. Thanos ain't got nothing on him. And so yeah, fight me on that. Like I don't care if you think he can do that. Vader, all he has to do is just that. In case you didn't see anything for the viewers, I did just a force choke and snap somebody's neck. So Thanos, get out of here. So yeah, Vader is him.
All right, I have a question to put you in a tough position, Mitch. Who was more justified in their atrocities, Darth Vader or Aaron Yeager?
Aaron Yeager. Easy. Aaron Yeager was definitely more justified in his the listen, when you have an entire world going against you, there's only one option, all right? There's only one. And that's the path Aaron took.
All right, so yes, again, as you've noticed, Darth Vader, one of the most, as we've mentioned several times, iconic villains, characters of all time. So we just wanted to really just like rep him, continue on in the character study series. So like we mentioned, last week we did Doctor Doom, this week Darth Vader, next week Obito Uchiha, just to wrap up the character study series. So with that, we are going to go into a speed run of the What's Hot because all of us are ready to go to sleep. So let's go from there. What you got?
Watch Agatha all along. It's a really fun watch. Like, is it like absolutely the best Marvel thing ever? I mean, maybe not start to finish, but some of the episodes are really fantastic. Great story.
That's good.
Down, 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 down the
Very catchy song.
road.
Sung that the entire day yesterday. Yeah.
Also, the Skeleton Crew, which is the newest Star Wars show, is releasing next month. So that comes out in December.
So, Meech.
All right, so we also got the anime, Bleach, Thousand Year Blood War, watch it. Blue Lock, hopefully they locked in on the animation, watch it. We also Don Da Don, watch it. Just watch it. That's all I gotta say about it. One Piece going on hiatus, so good luck to all the One Piece heads. We also have Penguin is about to air this finale. I'm not ready. That's all I'm willing to say about that. Also, in the realm of comics, Venom War still going on. Spawn is still spawning out here. Also, get this. They did it. Look, they just announced, be like yesterday, that an Agent Venom movie is happening.
Oh, I did not know that.
They announced it yesterday.
Dang, I don't know why I'm getting excited because it's Sony. So
Yeah.
let me calm down. Let me calm down.
But yeah, so where's my money, Sony? Where my money? That's all I'm asking. Where my money at? So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about it right now because we're speed run. Go.
All right. So the movie that came out last week, as of the time that you're hearing this, Heretic, a thriller that I really want to check out. Cobra Kai, the final season part 2 drops the Saturday after this comes out. So that's going to be the final season of Cobra Kai. Incredible. The fact that this started on YouTube Red and is like now one of the biggest shows on Netflix. Arcane is dropping this Saturday as we're recording. So that's I believe the first part of the final season of season 2 for that. And then also a trailer that dropped today that got me super hyped. Beastars, the final season part 1 trailer drop. So don't look at me like that. Beastars is super good, Meech. Yes, you hate furries. I have to remember that. And then in 2 weeks, or I guess a week after we're hearing this, remember, ladies, fellas, Wicked and Gladiator 2 are dropping on the same day. Figure it out what day you're going to see which one. I already have what day I'm going to see Wicked. I just got to figure out Gladiator 2.
I already figured out Gladiator. I just need to figure out Wicked.
So don't get broken up right before Thanksgiving. That's all I'm gonna say. All right, so let's get the plugs and get up out of here.
All right, so our Instagram, X formerly known as Twitter, and Threads are under Blurred City 22. Like, comment, subscribe, stay up to date on notifications, all that good jazz. We also have our Discord linked in the Instagram page where you can join this fine community of pure degeneracy. We also have our YouTube and Patreon, Blur City Pod, if you want to donate some extra cheddar. Like them Benjamins that we mentioned earlier. That way you get access to very Benjamin exclusive episodes. You know what I'm saying? After that, we have our email address, blurcity22@gmail.com. That's where you can submit episode suggestions, geek out, freak outs, random fan theory, your thoughts on these episodes. If you submit any criticism, it goes in a spam box, never to see the light of day. Finally, we have I am the Jedi born on Mustafar. On Instagram and TikTok, however long we got TikTok. And what you got?
All right. Well, as always, I guess you can find me on Instagram if you really want to. That's at JSteach. J is Jay, not just the letter J. But yeah, you can find me there.
All right, for my individual author pages, we have my Instagram at Metri_Dash. That is METRI_DASH. For my X/Twitter, which I may never be using again, that is at the Mad16. And if you're interested in my book, Phantom Reckoning, A Most Irregular Tale, that is available on Amazon, Kindle, and Barnes & Noble. So, as usual, we leave you with some words of advice or encouragement.
All right, I guess that's me.
Our guest.
There's pointing happening, but I'm sure our screens are all in different orders. Anyway, I guess, okay, words of encouragement. That redemption is a powerful storyline, and no one is so far gone that they cannot be redeemed if they so choose to walk the path of redemption. Redemption requires accepting all of who you are, grieving the things that you need to grieve, and, seeking absolution for the things that perhaps are mistakes that you made. But redemption is possible, and we should perhaps all seek to walk that path.
Absolutely. So as we like to say, it's not goodbye forever. It's just goodbye for now. And that's the Blurred City Podcast.
See ya later.
Bye.